Good afternoon, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the Monsters Den. Today we're going to take a look at a classic from 1957 from Hammer Film Productions, The Curse of Frankenstein. Some of you may be wondering, well, it's kind of odd that he's tackling, this show has only been a couple weeks old here. Interesting how he's tackling The Curse of Frankenstein before the original Frankenstein, right? The Universal horror picture. And I'm going to be getting to that. I didn't want to do too many Universals in a row. Wanted to give some more love to the some of the great Hammer films, right? But I wanted to kind of do this one first, and then on the next episode, I'm probably going to go and do the original Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, of course, and then I'll do a little kind of comparison of the two. But I wanted to kind of start up with this one because I was in a Hammer mood today, right? So I figure rewatch this again for the can't tell you how many times, right? Took some notes and figured we'd do a little synopsis of this film, all right, a little bit of historical info and what have you, and urge you all to go out and either rewatch it again or catch it for the first time if you haven't seen it. So, of course, 1957, Hammer is trying to revitalize the horror genre, adding their kind of gothic touches to a lot of the early horror classics from a decade or two prior. All right, so this was kind of like their first big one. So this one kind of spurred on, obviously Dracula or Horror of Dracula, which came out a year later, and then The Mummy, which came out 2 years later in 1959. So this was kind of the first big one for them. This kind of signaled their arrival on the Gothic horror scene after like a decade of doing like film noir and science fiction and some other light horror stuff. This was like the beginning of what would prove to be a lengthy career going into the 70s of putting out some classic horror films, right? So again, 1957, directed by the great Terence Fisher, who was involved in so many of these great horror flicks from Hammer. Filmed on a budget of $270,000, all right, U.S. dollars. Okay, of course, this is a British film studio, and it wound up pulling in over the years $8 million box office. Not too bad, right? Considering how little this film cost. Although in the 50s, $270,000, probably a decent amount of money, but not a big budget, a special effects type of film. Great costuming and great makeup, and most importantly, this was Hammer's first color horror film. Okay, all right. Also, of course, based on the 1818 novel by Mary Shelley, loosely based. I think if you compare like the storyline here and the storyline in the original Frankenstein by Universal, there's got a lot of subtle differences there. All right, I think the basis of the outcome and what happens during both of these films very similar to the original story. But a lot of changes here. They in fact, Hammer did that on purpose. They wanted to change up things a little bit, keep the integrity of the original Shelley story, but give their own spin on it. So here, the film starts out, and also little release notes here. So different release dates in both the UK and the US. Mainly here in the U.S., it was originally released as a double feature along with X the Unknown, which if you haven't seen, it's a pretty cool Hammer horror film, sci-fi film. Also later they re-released it with The Mummy as a double feature and also with Dracula as a double feature. Just think about going to the movies back in the late 50s and seeing like Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula or the Horror of Dracula, whichever title they were using, seeing that as a double feature, right? Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, back to back to back. Pretty cool, right? So anyway, cast here we've got, of course, as Victor Frankenstein, the adult Victor Frankenstein, you got the great Peter Cushing, one of my favorite actors of all time. You've got the equally great Christopher Lee as the creature or the monster, okay? Doesn't utter a sound in the entire film. You've got the gorgeous Hazel Court as Elizabeth, okay, who is actually Victor Frankenstein's cousin, all right? Grew up together, later to be married, all right? And you've got Robert Urquhart, I believe he says his name, and he is Dr. Paul Krempy, okay? Those are like the main characters in the film. So it basically starts off, they kind of start this film off interesting. So they start off actually at the end of the story. So here at the beginning, you have Victor Frankenstein is in jail. He's all disheveled, whatever. He's basically kind of almost like talking to a priest who's come to give him his, last rites. Okay. And he goes and proceeds to tell a story, this fantastic story, because he's obviously in prison for a reason, right? He obviously is in prison for murder. So he goes to tell the story. Picks off in his teenage years, right? So he inherits the house and everything, money and everything from his father who has passed away. So he becomes Baron Frankenstein as a teenager. Okay, in the beginning of the film, they show him and his aunt and his cousin, very very young Elizabeth, go off and say, basically they're going to go leave the house. They're going to go live somewhere else, and he's actually, Victor is going to be kind of paying them rent, going to kind of paying them off going forward so they can actually live. And then in comes Paul, Dr. Paul Krempe, okay, who agrees to come and work with Victor as almost like a mentor, as an instructor, co-scientist, could kind of help him along with his studies. All right, they form a very strong friendship over the years as a mentor, okay, friend, and then they kind of fast forward a bunch of years, and Victor is now a grown man alongside Paul, who looks a little bit older, but he's still fairly youngish, right? And they're doing all these experiments in the laboratory in the Frankenstein house, and they're experimenting with bringing inanimate things to life, okay? Because Victor, of course, very intelligent. He has a lot of dreams, and he gets kind of hung up on this whole thing. They bring like a dead puppy back to life. Okay, that's the first step. And, Paul is like, he's always kind of going along with what Victor wants to do, but to a certain limit, right? So he's like, well, this was fun, but, that's cool that we did that, but I think we need to stop there and go concentrate on other things. But, Victor's thinking bigger and better. Okay, well, no, if we could bring, something small like a dog, a puppy, to life, we have to think bigger, right? We have to start. How about if we were to create a human being, right? And Paul's like, come on, that's don't think we should do that. But Victor keeps playing on Paul, keeps talking. He eventually kind of talks him into it, right? So then things start to take a turn for the worst, right? So of course now they rob a grave. Victor convinces Paul to go rob a grave, take the dead body, okay, bring it back to the laboratory. He cuts off the head, right? Bandages, the hands. He cuts off the hands, bandages up the rest of the body, puts it in this like kind of tank, this water tank, right? So you see the body without the hands, without the head, all bandaged up, floating in there, and he's trying to figure out a way to kind of bring this creature that he wants to put together, this human being, bring it to life, right? And kind of an interesting scene too. That the parts of this film contain some scenes that were viewed as very shocking at the time. So of course, he cuts off the head. They don't really show it. The camera's like kind of up here, but that's what he's doing. And then he's got the head in a little bag. And of course, Paul is just absolutely disgusted at what he's doing. So he walks over, and he's created this like giant acid bath, which of course is meant to put any body parts that they're not going to use, put it in there, body parts gone, right? Because you can't be caught with anything, because of course what they're doing has never been done before. So there's a scene where he actually goes and drops the head in the acid bath. You don't actually see anything happening. You don't see the head kind of, bubbling and all that kind of stuff. But legend has it that Hammer actually did film that scene of the head going into the acid bath, right? That, of course, would not have sat well with the censors, right? So, and apparently that piece of footage has been lost to this day, right? So, again, Paul is really worried about what's going on here. He's not liking this. He keeps trying to talk him out of it, and Victor's not having any of it. But Victor the wheels are already in motion, right? So he's now saying, all right, I have to go away for a little bit. I need you to keep an eye on things here. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Right? And you're thinking, well, where the hell's he going? Right? We know where he's going. He's going to find bigger and better body parts because he's basically putting this. It's like building a car, right? You got to go get all the different parts. Building a car from scratch, you got to go get the engine, you got to get the exhaust, you got to get the transmission, all this kind of stuff. He's thinking the same way. So he goes and disappears. All right, doesn't really say where he's going. They never really say where he went. But during this time, they're expecting him back at some point. So apparently a little time goes by. Knock at the door, right? You got Justine, who is the maid of the house. She answers the door, and here is this very attractive young woman, who of course is Hazel Court, Elizabeth grown up. Hazel Court, beautiful woman. And she announces herself as, Cousin Elizabeth, and I'm here to see Viktor, and I'm here to live here. And they're like, and then Paul comes down. He's like, oh, Paul walks in, and she thinks Paul is Viktor. So she comes up to give him a hug and everything like that. He goes, whoa, hold on a second. I'm not Viktor. I'm his friend Paul. Oh, I haven't seen Viktor in so long. I wasn't sure. I don't know what he looks like anymore. Well, where is he? Well, he's not here, but he's expecting back any time. And who are you? And I'm like, well, I'm his cousin Elizabeth. I've come here to live. Right? And everybody's kind of perplexed, and Paul is thinking, Liv, you really should not be living here based on all that's going on. So, of course, as they're all getting acquainted, Viktor shows up. And, of course, he's like, oh, Elizabeth, hey, how are you? Hugs her. Good to see you. Maybe I'll see you at dinner later. Paul, let's go upstairs. And he's got a package, of course, and doesn't want to spend any time getting reacquainted with Elizabeth, but let's get back up to the laboratory. So Paul follows him up there, right? And he's like, aren't you going to whatever? He goes, well, I'll get acquainted with her later. Okay, I know I haven't seen her in a long time, whatever, but I wanted to show you this. So he's got like this little satchel. And another creepy point in the film, he opens up the satchel, and there you have two hands, okay, two severed hands that he explained was the hands of a sculptor who passed away. So he's automatically thinking that, because this person was a gifted sculptor that, and who passed, now these dead hands are going to have the same talents, right? Wishful thinking, I think, right? So, Paul continues to beg him to stop. But, of course, he's not having it. He is absolutely obsessed and driven here. So Paul, a little time passes here. Paul goes into Elizabeth's room one night and basically begs her to leave. That you can't stay here. There are things happening in this house that you don't understand, that you should not be around for. And of course, she's having none of it because she's like, this is the person who I'm supposed to be married, because that's kind of the way they figured it out when they were kids. When you guys are old enough, you're going to marry each other. So she's all about it. She's like, I'm marrying him, That's just the way it's going. And Paul hears this, and of course he is like, he's horrified. He's like, no, you can't marry this guy, so to speak. But meanwhile, while all this is going on, Viktor is having an affair with Justine, the maid. So they're showing them in corners of the castle or the house, whatever, and they're making out and, getting all into it. And so apparently this has been going on for a little while. So Justine is thinking that, he's my man, right? It's like, he and I are going to be the ones that are going to get married and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, don't know about that. So, as thing goes on, you start to see Viktor start to accumulate other body parts. Then you see him, you don't see faces, but you see him purchasing from someone a pair of eyes from someone who had just died. So he's paying money for the eyes. So he's got the eyes and the glass, the liquid and all that kind of stuff. He invites Paul, because Paul is trying to take a back seat from all this stuff now. So he invites Paul in to the laboratory. You need to see my progress. So he's got the big tank where the body's in. It's now covered with cloth or whatever, or some kind of tarp. And he takes him around the side. The camera doesn't go there, so the viewer doesn't see this. And Paul takes a look at kind of what he's been doing, and he's absolutely horrified. And he's like, you need to stop this. I can't take part in this anymore. You need to stop. But, Viktor is, he's like, I'm almost finished. And once you see, you're going to be absolutely proud, because now, I need to get the perfect brain. So you're thinking, and most people who are familiar with the original Frankenstein film or the story, the brain, getting the right brain is a big part. And because the perfect brain is not going to the head of the creature doesn't turn out like they expected, right? Well, so Viktor actually targets, what's his name? Professor Bernstein, all right, who's pretty old, a very well-respected professor in the community at the university, right? And apparently they knew each other, right? But he invites him over for dinner with he and Elizabeth. And he's, they have a nice meal, they're having some drinks, smoking some cigars, and the wheels are turning in Viktor's head. It's like, you know what, this guy's brilliant. That's going to be the brain for my creation. Okay, so Professor Bernstein says, thank you for such a wonderful evening. I think I'm going to retire to bed. So he's like, oh, I'll walk you upstairs. I want to show you a couple paintings, right? So they walk upstairs to another section of the house. Elizabeth is doing whatever she's doing somewhere else, so she doesn't hear anything that's going on. So they walk up the stairs. He wants to show them this painting, which is at the top of the stairs, overlooking like a landing. And of course, they got the barricade all around it, the railing and everything like that. So, which of course he has tampered with beforehand. So he's like, oh, here's the painting. I want you to take a look at this. Oh, but you know what? You should look at it from further back, right? And as he goes further back, of course, he leans on the banister, which then starts to give way. And then, of course, Viktor gives him the little shove, and boom. And there's a great shot, brutal, of the professor falling down to the flight before, landing on his head, neck breaking. And it's just like, probably done with a dummy, but it was pretty real looking. So professor's gone, right? So next scene, they go off. It's the funeral. Viktor, of course, is nice enough to allow the professor to be buried on the property, and they have this own like mortuary on the property because he's got no family or anything like that left. So the other associates from the college are like so happy that Viktor allowed them to do that. How nice of you. And Viktor's like, oh, you're very welcome. It's the least I could do. Yeah, right. So of course, he's got ulterior motive there. So as soon as everybody goes away and everything's quiet, he sneaks into the crypt and opens up the casket, gets out all his tools, and goes to take that brain. But of course, Paul's not that stupid. So Paul sees that he's not in the house or in the laboratory and goes down to the crypt, finds him in the act, all right, just finishing taking out the brain. He's got it in the glass with the water, and he's wrapping it all to take back to the laboratory. They argue, they get into a fight. They tussle, and of course the glass with the brain winds up smashing against the stone wall, and obviously the brain is damaged, right? So Viktor is all sorts of pissed off. He goes, leave me alone. He goes back, and for the next couple scenes, he's like working on the brain. All right. Long story short, you know where all this is going, right? He puts the damaged brain into the head of the creature, okay, because of course now he's got a head, right, all stitched together, and starts to run the experiment. So he's got all the machines going, right? Of course, that night he picks the night where it's like a thunder and lightning storm going on. He's got the bath, the whatever kind of solution that the creature's in, or the body is in, all bubbling away and everything like that. And he's got all the machines going, but nothing seems to be happening. He's like, I guess this isn't working, right? So he's like, I need Paul to help me do some things. So he like kind of leaves, goes to convince Paul to come and help him, which Paul's like, I'm not doing it. Meanwhile, while he's gone, some lightning kind of comes through the window and hits a couple of machines, starts things up again, and then all of a sudden, and all that electricity, all that gets ignited, goes into the tank. Tank gets emptied of water, and there you have this body all bandaged up head to toe, laying in the tank with no liquid in it. And then, of course, the camera goes in very slowly to the head and chest, and you start to see the chest heaving up and down, right? So finally, Viktor convinces Paul to go down and help him. He does. They open the door, and there is standing the creature, okay, head to toe with bandages, just standing there. And Viktor is like, oh my God, right? And then one of the best scenes in any of the Hammer horror films, all right, is the scene where the creature then rips off the bandage from his face. And there you have Christopher Lee in all his really nasty looking makeup, all right? Very different from Karloff's, right? So there's no flat top head electrodes. It's just basically, the dark hair, the really, really white, waxy, corpse-looking skin, and all the kind of like, stitches and just these big gashes all over his face, nasty-ass teeth, all right? And just really horrific looking. Okay, so of course, Victor goes and approaches him, and the creature grabs him by the throat and lifts him up and starts choking the life out of him, right? Because, of course, he's got this demented brain, he doesn't know any better. And then Paul comes running into the laboratory. He starts to try and get the creature off. The creature bats him aside. He goes flying, and then he finally picks up a chair, and he whacks him over the head. And that prompts him to drop Victor Frankenstein, turn around, and kind of like collapse, right? So then he's trying to revive Victor. Victor's, can barely breathe. They go and they put him on the table. They strap him all in, right? And then, of course, Paul's trying to convince Victor that you need to put this thing out of its misery. You absolutely need to put it out of its misery. And, then it kind of spirals from there. You know that the end is near in this whole story. So Paul goes and again tries to plead with Elizabeth to leave, right? She's just not having it. But Frankenstein, Victor is so incensed and so happy for himself because he's like, I've created a being. Even though the being just tried to kill me, I've created a being, right? So, of course, in the overnight, this is where it gets really, really fun. If it wasn't fun already, the creature breaks out of off the table, out of the straps, crashes through, trashes the laboratory, goes out the window, and he's off in the countryside. Okay, so they're like, "Oh my God, he's gone! We have to go find him." So they go out looking for him, the two of them, right? And of course, the next scene is you see like an old blind man, grandfather, and his grandson walking through the woods. Okay, you gotta have the blind man in the story, right? So the kid goes. The blind man sits down. He goes to pull out his pipe and have a smoke, and the kid goes over by the lake to go, collect some stones or to whatever he's doing. And then all of a sudden, of course, the creature comes walking up out of the woods into the clearing where the old man's sitting. And the old man can hear him, but of course he can't see him, so he's talking to him. He's not answering, not grunting, nothing like that. Now all of a sudden the creature, and again, how did he get this? We don't know. The creature now is dressed in a pair of black slacks, it looks like, and a long black kind of trench coat, like a pea coat type of thing. All right. So where did he get this stuff? Where'd the bandages go? Nobody knows. He looks pretty well dressed to me now, right? So he's out scouring the countryside. The old man gets up and tries to talk to him. He's not listening. The old man's getting freaked out by the fact that this person who's here, who he can hear but can't see, is not saying anything. He pulls out his staff. He tries to hit the monster. The monster grabs the staff, breaks it in half. The old man tries to run away. He falls, and we assume that the creature kills the old man, right? So next thing, Paul and Victor are still roaming around looking for him. They see him. Okay, he's just ambling about. And, Victor's like, thank God we found him, but Paul's got a gun. So Paul tries to shoot him. Victor's like, no, you can't shoot him. So he goes walking towards the creature. Creature starts walking towards him, and Paul's like, screw this. Paul aims, fires, hits him right in the eye. Down he goes. So, of course, Victor is completely pissed off, all right, that he did that because, of course, he doesn't want the creature to die. This is creation, right? So they agree. Paul's like, this was for the best. This had to be done. You needed to stop this, whatever. So Victor's like, okay, I get you. So we got to get rid of him. Nobody can see him. So they go. They dig a grave in the woods, bury him in the woods. They go back. Paul's like, that's it. I'm out of here. All right. As long as that creature is dead, I'm not as worried about Elizabeth being safe here. So I can't be here anymore. So he basically packs up his stuff and he leaves. All right, he's gone. But of course, as it's revealed, Victor actually wound up going out to the grave in the woods, digging up the creature, bringing him back to the laboratory, and he's dead, right? And hanging him up there, and it's like, I'm going to revive him again. Okay. So of course now the wedding is being planned, right? So now weeks go by. Okay. The wedding's being planned between him and Elizabeth, and all this time he has revived the creature. He's got the creature chained up in the laboratory. He's actually put another brain in him. all right, because he's been experimenting brain experiments, and you can see the creature's got his head shaved, right, fixed his eye and all that kind of stuff. So at this point in time, now that they've announced that the wedding is going to happen, Justine, the maid, is not happy about it because she thought that Viktor was going to be her man. I'm the one you're going to marry, right? And he's like, I never gave you that impression. No, I'm marrying Elizabeth. That's all there is to it. And that she announces that she is with child, right? So she's pregnant with his kid. And she says that I also know that what you've been doing up here in this laboratory all the time. And I will tell if you don't agree to marry me, I'm going to tell everybody about us, about the child, and about what you're doing up in that laboratory. And he's like, oh, you think so? You don't know anything. You don't. And she goes, I know. He's like, oh, okay, whatever. So that night, of course, dressed in her little nightgown, she goes and sneaks into the laboratory. Of course, she gets in, right? So obviously, something's up there. And she stumbles upon the room with the creature. Of course, Viktor knows all this is going on. He locks the door behind her. And, of course, the creature murders Justine. So she is out of the way. All right. Pre-wedding night before the wedding, they have a big party. I guess the rehearsal dinner, right? And, Elizabeth is looking fantastic, right? Hazel Court, very attractive woman, if I haven't said it already. And everybody goes home, and she's all into having a nice, sexy night with her fiancé, soon to be married tomorrow. And he's like, no. He's like, let's, I have work to do, so he goes up to the lab. She's all disappointed, right? And, of course, Paul winds up showing up because, of course, even though those two are not speaking anymore, he said he would come for the wedding. So he shows up. And he's happy to see Elizabeth and everything like that. And she's like, "Oh, Viktor's going to be so happy to see you, but he's locked up in his laboratory." And he's like, "Oh, okay. I'm surprised he's still doing that. Whatever." She's like, "Oh, yeah, just more than ever." So she's like, "Oh, but he'll be happy to see you. And he'll show you what he's been working on lately." So he goes up there. Paul's kind of surprised to see him. Didn't think he was going to show up. And he's like, "Oh, I have something to show you." So he takes him into the back room, and there's the creature, alive again, chained up. Okay, and Paul is like in shock. I can't believe that you brought this thing back to life, right? So he's absolutely disgusted, and he says, I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna turn you into the authorities, right? And Viktor goes on to tell him that it's just as much his fault that the creature is as he is, because of course he's showing him. He's telling, get up, stand, sit, and he's barely comprehending, but he's doing these little commands. It's like, look at you, you're teaching him like he's a dog, type of thing. When this is your superior human being that you were going to create. Look at this monster here, right? And so Viktor says, well, it's just as much your fault, my fault as it is your fault that he's like this, because if you wouldn't have, fought with me in the crypt, the good brain I had for him wouldn't have gotten ruined, and then you went and shot him in the eye. So it's like, he's this bad because it's just as much your fault as my fault, right? So they continue to fight, right? Paul's like, I'm going to the authorities, and he storms out of the place. Viktor goes running after him. Okay, running out of the house after him. They fight outside on the grounds. While all this is going on, Elizabeth's like, what is going on here? And she sees the door to the laboratory open. Now, meanwhile, she's never been in that laboratory. So what does she do? She decides to go investigate. Okay, while she's moving her way into the laboratory, the creature finally decided that, hey, you know what? Maybe I can get out of this chain. So he goes up and he starts pulling the chain from the wall, rips it off, right? Escapes through the window. He's up walking around on the roof. She goes in, she grabs the candle, the lantern, right? And she's looking around. She sees someone outside up on the roof, so she goes out there. She sees him. Oh my God, the creature's walking around on up top on the roof. All right. So down below, while these two guys are fighting down below, they see the creature up on the roof. So oh my God, we got to stop. So they go inside. They notice that Elizabeth is up there. Okay, Viktor goes up, and Paul's like, I gotta call the authorities, whatever. So Viktor's up on the roof. He grabs the gun. Okay. The creature grabs Elizabeth. All right. Viktor goes to not even taking a good shot, goes and fires off 2 shots. One hits Elizabeth in the shoulder. The other one hits the monster also in the shoulder or the neck or something like that. So he kind of pushes Elizabeth aside. He comes rampaging towards Viktor. There's only 2 shots in the gun. Throws the gun at him, doesn't do anything. As the creature's descending upon him, he grabs the lantern, throws it at the creature, who immediately goes up in flames, right? Because, of course, the Frankenstein monster does not like fire. And he eventually crashes through a window that overlooks the laboratory. And where does he land in? Lands in the acid bath tank. No more creature. No remnants, no nothing, right? So now, and they don't show this, but then the next scene, they're back in the jail cell, okay, which is where the beginning of the film started off. And he's again talking to the priest, and he's pleading with the priest that, so you see, I didn't kill Justine. The creature did. The creature that I created. Paul will fill you in on the rest of the story, because apparently the reason why he's in jail is he's been charged with the murder of Justine. Because, of course, there is no creature to blame it on, because he fell into the acid bath. There's no remnants of any creature left, right? So this whole story he's been, telling everybody, he can't prove. So finally, Elizabeth and Paul come to the jail because he's on death row. He's getting ready to go to the guillotine, right? He's getting ready to be put to death. And that's why the priest is there, giving him the last rites. So Paul comes to, and Elizabeth comes to visit. Paul goes into the cell, and he's pleading with Paul to tell him the story about the creature. Tell him what happened. It was not me who killed Justine. And Paul's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know about any creature, and all that kind of. He's just playing dumb. He's like, he's too far gone at this point. And so Victor's like, no, you must tell them. You must tell them it wasn't me, right? So, of course, as the movie finishes, he goes back to Elizabeth, says to Elizabeth, there's nothing we can do for him now. And the last scene of the movie is they show the guards taking him to the guillotine to be put to death. And that's how the film ends. You don't see him dying. You don't see the guillotine come down, okay? Which is interesting how they did that, because you got to wonder, okay, here we're going to start talking about other films in the series. This is where the Hammer films are different than the Universal films, because the Universal films, the original creature that was created, you basically couldn't kill. He would show up film after film after film. No matter what you did to him, he would not die. He would keep coming back. Whereas in the Hammer films, they would continually kill these creatures, and he would just create another one, okay? It's not like they were, these creatures were immortal, which, when you think about it, the way probably the smarter way to tackle this storyline was the Hammer films, because the Universal films made it seem like there was nothing you could do to these, even though they were basically human beings stitched together, okay, charged up with electricity and created a new being, right? But couldn't burn him, couldn't bury him in rubble, couldn't freeze him, it couldn't dismember. The Frankenstein monster could not be killed. But in the Hammer films, it was Viktor Frankenstein who kept bringing new creatures to life. Okay, so in the end of this first film, there is no more creature. Okay, in actuality, the creature is Viktor Frankenstein. So as we would see by successive sequels, he winds up not getting put to death. Okay, and he's still around to create more havoc, and that's how you have all these other sequels with all these different creatures. Each one looked different than the next, right? And that's how Hammer kind of dealt with this whole Frankenstein series. All right, it was very different from the Universals, so but still pretty good. I find this to be a very enjoyable film. It's very different than Universal's Frankenstein, obviously. While this is probably one of my favorite, this is probably like a top 5, top 8 Hammer film. I still prefer the Universal quite a bit more. But that is very good nonetheless. Some other things about the film. First of all, the acting of Peter Cushing, outstanding. As always, I think he was one of the most consistently entertaining actors in as far as Hammer went, but as far as like classic horror films, one of the best. Always so sophisticated and professional. Okay, and I think he had the right amount of emotion and intensity when needed. I think they made him look, as always, very regal, because he was a bit younger here in these films. A lot of us remember Peter Cushing later on with the silver hair. Much older here, he's much younger, very dapper, debonair. Okay, very well acted. I think the actor who played Paul, whose name is Robert Urquhart, excellent. Christopher Lee, obviously not given a lot to do here, other than kind of amble around and look a little menacing. And I think the reason why he didn't play so many of these monsters like this or The Mummy and do the sequels is because he felt that, not really much to do here. Even though they're paying me to do this, I'd rather have a role where I can have some dialogue, have some lines and all that. And I think in some of the Dracula films, that also frustrated him a bit. There were some of the Dracula films where he had some dialogue, others where he had none at all, and that was a problem for him. And, I think that no matter whether he's talking or not, I think Christopher Lee has this presence on screen that's just undeniable. And I think the two of them working together are just amazing. Even in, they're only in the same scenes together for a short little time, but I think they both do very well. And of course, this film would start a slew of other films in the horror genre for Hammer, where there is a very, very attractive lady or ladies, wearing all sorts of period pieces that showed off a lot of their ample assets, and that became just as much of a talking point in a lot of these films as the actual action and the horror elements. It was Hammer's beautiful women as it was everything else. So it kind of all really started here with the lovely Hazel Court. So a great film. I dig it a lot, and good acting, a lot of good atmosphere. And I think the colors are gorgeous. So, again, this is the DVD copy. This is also on Blu-ray. I haven't seen the Blu-ray yet, but this is a very good quality DVD. This is the Warner Brothers. I forget when they released this, but I've had this one for a while. So, 2002. That's the release date on that one. So, there you have it. Curse of the Frankenstein by Hammer, 1957. Coming up next weekend, more Hammer horror, and actually more horror classics, not necessarily Hammer, maybe do another Hammer, but I think I would like to do Frankenstein next, if not the one after that, because I think that'll be good to kind of compare the two a little more. But let us know what you think. Lots more coming, just to give you an idea of some of the other stuff that I plan on tackling here. So I want to get to some Godzilla films soon. Obviously, a lot more Universal and Hammer films. I got all the Vincent Price classics, the Roger Corman films, all those kind of gothic horror films. Got a lot of those I want to do. So many more. At some point, I'm also going to tackle some of the slasher films of the 70s. Okay, like Halloween and Black Christmas, and a lot of those great ones. The first Friday the 13th. All those, Alien. There's so many. I mean, because I'm a fan of a lot of stuff, and if you saw my horror collection, you'd understand that there are a lot. So it's all going to come, but as we're not doing these that often, so it's going to take a while to get to a lot of them, but we'll bring them when we can. So this is on the web at www.seeitranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time with tons of music stuff and a little bit of horror. So take care. Thanks for coming to the Monsters Den, and we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.